Welcome, ladies and gentlemen of the old world. I hope you're all doing well, and today, my friends, we're here to talk about the best lord for each faction in Total War Warhammer competitive multiplayer. So this video is going to be focusing on domination mode, however, it will have some relevance to land battles as well, as I feel like there's much more similarities between the two modes now. Now, let us begin with the first faction today, which is going to be the Beastmen. So the Beastmen have some pretty good lore choices. Honestly, Morker is very good, Torox is good. Malagor the Dark Omen, a little bit more niche, but summoning Cygors and casting Pendulum is never a bad thing. But overall, I think the best lord is the Great Bray Shaman. The Great Bray Shaman, in my experience, is just very cost effective. He comes at a relatively cheap price. He's got access to some great lores of magic via Beast, Death, Shadows, and Lore of the Wild. So he can really address a number of issues and a number of matchups. Hey, you're looking to snipe an enemy lord very effectively and you can't quite get to him in melee, Lore of Death. You're looking to deal with a lot of infantry, Lore of Shadows, to get the juicy Pit of Shades and also use Malekith to slow down enemy skirmishers and catch them. You get a lot of utility out of this bad boy. Now, I do think he's better than Malagor the Dark Omen simply because you can bring him on the Chariot option. On top of that, I do think the diversity of magic options just makes him better. With Malagor, you're locked into, a set kit of spells, and I really just do think having the Bray Shaman on ground on a Chariot is a better option. Now, one reason why he's so good is because I think one of the hands-down strongest techs for the Beastmen, and if you guys are Beastmen players, try this, you won't regret it. You go with a Great Bray Shaman on a Chariot, then you go double Wargore on the Tuskgore Chariots, and for 900 gold, when you strip down their kit, they're one of the most cost-effective units in the game. They're so damn good. And if you go with Torox, for example, you can't go double Wargore without bringing, you need a caster, right? So you would have to only bring one, and I really do think going Bray Shaman with the double Wargore is so cost-effective. And the Bray Shamans have good items too. You have Scroll of Shielding to prevent them from being sniped. You have the Forbidden Rod, and again, they have those great Chariot options. Give it a try. Try the Great Bray Shaman with the Lore of Magic you think is best in that matchup, and then bring the double Wargore. You're not going to regret it at all. Now, next up, we're going to be going to the Dark Elves, and for the Dark Elves, I'm so happy to say this, it's Malekith the Witch King. Who would have thought? Malekith, in my experience, is hands down the strongest lord for the Dark Elves these days, and guess who's number 2? Malus Darkblade. Who would have thought, before Warhammer 3, when, obviously we had Scourge Hunters and Marathi and Double Manticore every single game for 3 years, right, or for however long it was. That Malekith would be the king. The king is back, baby, and I'm so happy to see it. Now, what's really good about him is dragons, have some weaknesses of being surrounded and pinned in place, but Malekith addresses the weakness of dragons by punishing surrounds, right? If you land on top of Malekith, you're going to be getting hit by a Gaze of Malice and also by a Soul Stealer, which heals for 12% of his total HP and does a ton of AoE damage, right? So overall, he's just such a linebacker, so hard to remove. He has a breath attack, he's a good fighter, has access to a couple items which are a little bit more niche, I would say. Typically, the main kit for Malekith is going to be going just bare bones with Soul Stealer. However, bringing the Circlet of Iron for a passive power recharge rate is pretty good. And there's plenty of other options. Destroyer can be decent, but I do think the Circlet of Iron is something you see because it does grant him a constant power recharge of 80%, and it reduces his miscast chance by 50%. But yeah, Malekith is just an absolute raid boss. The king is back, baby, and I'm so happy to see it. He's just such a cool character. Now, for Grand Cathay, it's going to be the Dragon-Blooded Shugengun Lord. They are just so good. And the reason why, I think, is because Cathay is an army that typically wants to go a little bit wider, right? Maximizing their best units, like the Iron Hill Gunners and a bunch of Jade Warriors, which are just so cost-effective with the Harmony now and new Domination. Cathay is easily a top 6 or 7 faction in Domination, and the Dragon-Blooded Lord just has such good synergies with that. Number 1, great lores of magic. Lore of Yin and Lore of Yang are both just super good lores of magic, some of the best in the entire game. They have the Longweb mount, which makes them very maneuverable, and they can really bring a lot of battlefield utility. But more importantly, they have the Jade Amulet. So the Jade Amulet gives 160 power recharge and also reserves per second, and it's just a great item. So their spells are cheap and cost effective. They have summons. They have some of the best nukes in the game via Talons of the Night, as well as the Dragon's Breath. And I just think the Dragon-Blooded Lords are just such powerhouse units. If you're in an artillery duel with Grand Cathay, just whip one of these guys out, drop some summons on top of them, on their artillery, their Sunmaker, and it just karate chops them. So incredibly good. Now, the next faction we're going to be going to is Khorne. And for Khorne, Khorne's got some decent lord choices. I think overall, Scarbrand is pretty decent. Rampage is very strong. But I think the most cost-effective lord, in my experience, is Valkia. Valkia is just awesome. Anti-large, armor-piercing, extremely maneuverable. She's also infantry-sized, so she's tougher to kill than you would think. Oftentimes, a lot of the things you use to kill lords are anti-large. She's also a smaller target for shooting and for guns. And she can become invulnerable for 13 seconds. She gives Khorne magic via the Spear of Sleipnir, which is pre-nerf pendulum. Does a ton of damage. And overall, I just think she's a great character. Valkia is awesome, both thematically as well as in gameplay. Now for Norsk, it's a little bit tricky. I think that both Wulfric and Throg are super good. The Marauder Chieftain's a little bit of a meme. But Wulfric and Throg are both good and interchangeable. But I would say since Be'lakor has become so meta with like Warriors of Chaos and has just been really, really dominant in a lot of matchups. Throg is one of the few characters in the game that can go fisticuffs with Be'lakor. He can heal through a lot of the DPS. He has anti-large. He can, pin Be'lakor in place using Frostbite. And I just think that Throg is so nice. The regeneration, the anti-large, I think overall make him a little bit of a stronger choice in more matchups than Wulfric as well. But Wulfric is really good. The lore of pirate ships is good with him, right? Sending his Sea Fang through the ranks. So I would say this is a really close one, but overall, just due to Be'lakor being very meta and very strong, Throg is a slightly stronger pick. But again, I think when Be'lakor gets nerfed, which will probably happen eventually, I would say that Wulfric is going to be the stronger pick of the two, simply because he's a good duelist and Sea Fang is just incredibly strong. But for now, I think that Throg is the Troll King. Now for the Skaven, it's going to be Ikit Claw. Who would have thought again? A year ago, Ikit Claw, right? But Ikit is very, very good because of Howling Warp Gale and how good his shooting is on his Doom Wheel. It does a ton of damage, but let's break it down. Let's look at our boy Ikit Claw. So the Mad Inventor Rat is here. He has Brass Orb, which is an incredible spell. It has 100% armor piercing damage. And so this is good for clearing out infantry. Like Skaven often, you're going to be wanting to nuke off enemy infantry and just allow your missile pieces to shine. So Brass Orb holds them in place and also does some pretty good damage. So 100%, I would say that Ikit Claw with Brass Orb, unlimited power, which gives a ton of reserves. And, the Lord Magic is also quite good. Summons for Skaven aren't quite as good as they used to be. I think more battlefield control and some of the things that really wreck Skaven are flying SCMs like Manticores, like Be'lakor, Furies and Harpies going into your back line. So Howling Warp Gale, Warp Lightning is also a very good spell, and Crack's Call is amazing too. And Ikit also gets insane Winds of Magic with unlimited power, which gives him 160 and 20.20 reserves per second. So yeah, Ikit Claw I think is the strongest lord. And what's cool about Skaven is their other lords are viable too. Skrulk is decent, Deathmaster is niche but good. Throughout the Unclean is also very good with his speed and Rat Ogre summons. Skaven are really got a whole kind of slew of good lords, which I think is awesome. It's nice to see that for the health of the game. Now, next up, we are going to be going to the forces of Tzeentch. And for Tzeentch, this is a tough one. Kairos is very good. He's got Blue Fire, he's got a Snare, but at the end of the day, I'm more of a fan of the Exalted Lord of Change, and I'll explain why. So the Exalted Lord of Change has better stats. He's got 50 and 50 and 450. Kairos has 35, 20, and 420. And also the Lord of Change, on top of having better stats, has the ability to summon 2 units of Chaos Furies, which is just so clutch. Like when he's flying in to harass something, he can drop a Fury on top of their range units, just use them for any number of purposes. He's a better fighter, and yeah, honestly, I just think that the Fury summon really sets him apart. Kairos is very good though. The Snare is incredibly strong. Snares are some of the best abilities in the entire game, but I'm just such a big fan of the Lord of the Change. His combat prowess and having the ability to summon Furies and just spam Blue Fire all day is just so nice. He does also have the Staff of Change, which I don't use terribly often, but some people have told me they've had some decent success with that. I don't play a whole lot of Tzeentch, so obviously take that with a grain of salt. Now, for the Warriors of Chaos, I think that this is a tricky one. I do think the best lord for the Warriors of Chaos, if you're if you just have 2 players who are evenly matched going at it, I think Be'lakor is probably the strongest. Be'lakor was clearly the case of a character that was designed for campaign and somehow found his way into multiplayer, right? I think he's a little bit overtuned. I think Be'lakor should lose about 1,000 HP and should have a little bit of a cost association increase with some of his abilities. But aside from that, I would say Be'lakor is number 1, but right behind him is probably Archaon. Archaon is a raid boss. He's got a great lore of magic. He has crowd clearing with Burning Head, sniping with Spirit Leech. And what's really insane about Archaon is if he's on Dorgar chasing you, he's got 90 speed, which is insane. And on top of that, he also has a gross amount of mass. So Archaon and his horse can push through infantry now and just hunt you to the ends of the earth. So I would say Be'lakor is number 1 for Warriors of Chaos, followed up by your boy Archaon, the Ever Chosen. Now for Bretonnia, this is a little bit of an odd one as well. Used to be Fey Enchantress in Warhammer 2. Mortis Engine was really good because obviously in Warhammer 2, endgame battles often devolved into blobs where you had to deal with something. You couldn't just win an objective. So Fey Enchantress forcing people into Mortis was better. But now I think with the battlefield being a little bit more dynamic in domination mode, I think that Alberic is actually the best choice. So Alberic is awesome because his Trident is really good at crowd clearing. So, Bretonnia isn't always the best at getting rid of halberds. And, Wrath of Madon has 100% armor piercing damage and does break leadership. So you cast this on a halberd unit as you charge them with cavalry in the back, and it will rout them and you can chase them off. What's really good about him as well is he gives anti-large to nearby units with the Braid of Borderlow. So what you do with him is you ride him with Hippogriff Knights, you ride him with Questing Knights, and suddenly you have these huge armor-piercing anti-large squads, which are very good. I think Alberic is actually the best choice. I really like him. And now we're on to the Dwarves, and the Dwarves in general don't really have the best lords. I would say most of their lords are pretty mediocre. I think going a very cheap Ungrim isn't a bad idea. For just over 1,000 gold, you get a pretty good duelist who can sit on an objective and fight. But overall, I think the best lord is going to be Thoric. Thoric is really good because he's got a slowing ability, which is invaluable to the dwarves. You know, of course, you can go with the Runesmith, but what separates him from a basic rune lord is the fact that he does have the Rune of Doom, which is a bound ability, which is basically like the Dwarven Wa. It gives your entire army stats and melee attack, which is pretty good. You know, dwarves aren't super quick, so being able to reinforce a unit across the map with some stats isn't bad at all. So again, don't leave home without Thoric Ironbrow. He is very, very good. Now, next up, we're going to be jumping on over to their rivals, which is going to be the Greenskins. So for the Greenskins, I think they have a couple pretty good lord choices. I would say number one for the Greenskins is going to be Grom the Paunch. Domination is a very, very long, kind of heavy trading game mode now, and Grom the Paunch can really bounce between objectives. He does a lot of damage, and he's incredibly hard to snipe with his Lucky Banner, regeneration, and his Chariot being very speedy. Second, though, I would say Wurzag. I think Wurzag is also very good. You know, having a big force multiplying effect via the Bonewood Staff, being able to give melee attack to your entire army, and having a snare is also very good. But Wurzag is very vulnerable to being sniped. So overall, I would say Grom the Paunch is the best. Just brings so much to the battlefield, tough to snipe. Oftentimes, your opponents will dump a very heavy, disproportionate amount of resources into trying to kill him, and he's just like an unholy terror and very, very tough to finish off. So now we're going to be heading on over to Kisslive. And for Kisslive, as much as it pains me to say, I think that the Ice Witch is the best lord. She's just very cost effective. You can get an Ice Witch with like her optimal spells, the Leopard Summon, as well as her mount for like just over 1,000 gold, and that's so good, right? Because Kisslive's Lords of Magic aren't the best, but Lore of Ice isn't terrible. It has some decent crowd clearing with Ice Maiden's Kiss. Heart of Winter and Ice Sheet isn't bad for a little bit of battlefield control and making sure your cap get those good charges. But being able to summon a Snow Leopard for a cheap price point and, you know, have, you know, access to your Lords of Magic, I think is really good. Second up, if we're talking like legendary lords, I would say that it's probably between Kostalton, who does have healing and AoE heals, and maybe Katarine, because she does have a nice crowd clearing bound ability with Frostsang. But overall, I would say that the Ice Witch, with either Lore of Magic, depending on the matchup you're in, is probably going to be your best bet. Now for Nurgle, Nurgle is for sure one of the weaker factions in the meta now. But I would say that Festus the Leech Lord, despite his nerfs, is still the best choice. Having an AoE Mortis engine that doesn't require you to be in contact, even if Festus is retreating from something and broken, he still drains you. And even if he's broken and trapped in a blob, he's still going to be providing his healing and damage auras. I mean, Mortis engines are just strong. AoE healing is very strong. He has a good Lore of Magic. He's, you know, got some decent combat prowess. I would say that Festus is probably the strongest lord here for the forces of Big Papa Nurgle that allows you to weather the storm, right? Because, again, like, Kugath is nice with his Mortis engine, but there's going to be times where you can't catch anything, and having that AoE heal constantly going with Festus is just going to be so strong. Now for Slaanesh, it's a really, really tough one. I would say it's heavily between Azazel and Sigvald. I've been seeing Azazel making a little bit more of an appearance for Slaanesh lately. He, in general, I think has more synergy with Slaanesh's overall playstyle. So I would probably say Azazel is the best lord for Slaanesh. Because Sigvald's cool, but Sigvald's more of an attrition lord that's like based on just camping on an objective and grinding a long game, which is nice for like Warriors of Chaos and more durable factions. But Slaanesh's playstyle is really just like gather up a big Alpha Strike, wait a little bit and Alpha Strike someone, which I think is more the forte of Azazel, who also can break leadership using his Demon Blade effect and has a great Lore of Magic to buff your entire Slaanesh army. So again, I would say that Azazel is probably the best lord for Slaanesh. Now for Vampire Coast, they have some great lore choices. Noctilus is very viable with his summons. Even Luther Harkin can be used to kind of goon and trade effectively. Saloster is also very good for bunker busting with Lore of the Deep, you know, using Kraken's Call, Van Geist Revenge, getting a nice summon to the back line. What's really nice about her summon now, the Ghosts of the Past, is that the ghostly knights she summons have 100% armor piercing, which is really, really good. But overall, the best lord, in my opinion, is the Vampire Fleet Admiral, with either the pistol or the polearm, depending on what you're doing. Probably the pistol lord. And the reason why is because they have access to some really good Lords of Magic via vampires and, you know, death, but they have one of the better items, which is the Black Pariah Pit. So you get a really cheap lord, which allows you to go wider for Vampire Coast, which is very strong with their playstyle. On top of that, the Black Pariah Pit gives you 240 power recharge, which is insane for 30 seconds. So you just have so much Winds of Magic. You can just be spamming Winds of Death, Drown Dead, Invocation, whatever. And it also gives you reserves back. So every single time you use the Black Pariah Pit, which has only a 2-minute cooldown, you're getting 9 reserves back in the tank, which is just so good. I mean, over the course of a long game, you'll basically never run out of wins, which is so good. So the Vampire Fleet Admiral is hands down the best, simply because they have the Black Pariah Pit, which is just a very, very, you know, strong item, perhaps a little bit overtuned. I mean, like, even Balthazar Gelt's Staff of Valons isn't that good, and that's like a legendary Lord's item, right? Now, heading on over to the Wood Elves. This is a tricky one. I was very torn. You know, what my heart wanted to say was the Sisters of Twilight, because again, in a long game, they're very good at like sniping and gooning and getting value and picking things off and really swaying battles in that way. However, I think the most cost-effective lord, after watching some very high-level Wood Elf tournament play recently, is the Ancient Tree Man, actually, because he's a very good fighter. He causes terror. He has the Power Stone. and he has access to Lore of Life. So more specifically, the Ancient Treeman with Lore of Life. And this is only because Dweller's Blow is just so gross. It's so strong. So you just go Ancient Treeman with Dwellers and Earthblood, and he's hard to kill. He gives Wood Elves good sustainability, which they often lack in the front line. And then Dweller's Below just kills like any number of threats. Now, if Dweller's Below were to be nerfed, I would probably say the Sisters of Twilight. So again, I would probably count on that. I feel like Dwellers will get nerfed at some point, but again, for now, it's going to be the Ancient Treeman. Now, for the Demons of Chaos, it's going to be Red Olgor. No, I'm just joking. It's Be'lakor. But Red Olgor, he's in all of our hearts. And, you know, honestly, if Be'lakor didn't exist, it probably would be Red Olgor because he's a good fighter, anti-large with regeneration. But Be'lakor is just broken. He's overtuned. You guys heard me talk about him earlier. He's just very, very strong. And he's pretty much like, you guys know the meme with Homer Simpson, where he's like standing in front of Marge and he's like super in shape and Marge is like all surprised. But then you look behind Homer and he's got like some like clothing lines, like tying all the fat to his back and pulling it backwards. Be'lakor is like the clothing line in the back for the Demons of Chaos, which are, you know, objectively a pretty terrible faction, but he's so strong that he can carry them. So Be'lakor for Demons of Chaos. Now for the Empire, this is incredibly tough because Empire are a faction that really like adjust. There's not like one general strategy they do against everybody. They just play wildly different depending on the matchups you're in, right? But for the Sons of Sigmar, I would probably say like in the really hard, sweaty matchups, if we're talking against like Warriors of Chaos and like these type of factions, that Karl Franz has carried me out of many a bad situation. So he recently got magic damage, which gives him a ton of relevance against demons and various undead units. And Gal Maraz and Reikland Runefang are just so good. And the reason why this is also very good, and I would have said Boris Todbringer otherwise because of the healing, but the reason why I picked Franz is because Life Wizards are super in meta right now because of how overpowered Dwellers Below is. So what you do is you bring a Life Wizard, you go with Regrowth for Franz and Dwellers Below to basically kill blobs. It is so good. So Franz is just a beater. He can really remove big threats, and he's not like just an anti-large duelist. He's good at just breaking formations. The Reikland Runefang is really nice with cab charges. You bring that in with some like Knights of the Blazing Suns, Antler's Reiksguard, and they can just buckle a formation. I would say, yeah, he's probably number one for me. But then, like, Balthazar Gelt's super meta, too. Like, the Empire, yeah, you got Gelt, you got Franz, you got Boris. Those are probably the best. I would say that the Mustache Man has kind of fallen out of favor simply because it's not like land battles anymore where you have to deal with him in the late game, right? Like, oftentimes it develops into a blob in the late game and everybody's kind of run out of shit. And that's when Volkmar is like a raid boss, right? Whereas in Domination, you can avoid him a little bit more, and you can't really avoid Franz. He's going to be coming at you with the hammer and 90 movement speed. So, Prince and Emperor all day. I'm a little bit biased just because he's one of my favorite characters in Warhammer Fantasy, but it could be Boris Todbringer. It very well could be Boris Todbringer because of the healing, but today, Sigmar calls, Franz is here. Now, next up, we're going to be going to the High Elves. For the High Elves, man, I saw a high-level tournament game the other day, which was between two really, really good players. I'm not talking like lower brackets, where the High Elves actually defeated Slaanesh using Turin. But overall, I would probably say the strongest lord for the High Elves is going to be just the humble Archmage. The Archmages of the High Elves have access to just so many different lords of magic, which gives them so much viability, right? So what's really good about the Archmage, right? You're playing against any of these artillery factions. You're playing against Cathay, you're playing against Empire. Well, you put them on a Great Eagle, use the Armor of the Stars, which makes them stalk and unspottable, and you sneak up on their artillery, and you use a Dwellers Below or any other number of magic spells to kill their artillery or kill any high-value targets. Just such good utility. And again, the diversity of magic that High Elves have, Beast, Death, Fire, Heavens, High Magic, Lore of Life, Light, Metal, Shadows, like whatever you need them to do, they can really do it. I think they're very good. But again, the other High Elf Legendary Lords, if we're looking at just kind of the whole run of it, I would say that the Archmage is probably the most viable, but after that, I mean, Teclis isn't bad. He's got nets. He's got some good ones and magic items. Larry's very good for abusing SCMs and healing blobs. Tyrion isn't bad. It's just being a sustainable piece to kind of fight amongst your ranks. And yeah, I mean, High Elves have some decent choices for sure, but I would say that the Archmage of Beast is probably, not Beast, excuse me, the Archmage, depending on whatever magic you need, is probably going to be the best. All right, now we're getting to the Lizards, and for the Lizards, it is going to be Lord Croak, which I know you're saying he's a hero, but often he's brought as the Lord, and the reason why he's so incredibly strong right now, and assuming this bug does get fixed, I know CA can let bugs hit for a long time, but assuming it does get fixed, he wouldn't be the strongest Lord, but with this bug, he is. Basically what it does is the Deliverance of its spells, they have no cooldown between them. They don't have like a shared global cooldown. So he could just like rapid fire these spells and they don't have any cooldown, which is pretty insane. So if you're going to be saying Lord Croak is the strongest lord for the dinos, you also have to say Tic-Tac-Toe. Because Tic-Tac-Toe is the actual lord you bring in reserve if you go with Lord Croak, because he only costs 800. You could bring him out and also doesn't really put a big hamper on your reinforcement. So again, I would say Lord Croak followed up by, in tandem with your boy Tic-Tac-Toe. So now we're going on to the Ogre Kingdoms. This is very easy. Greasus is probably the worst lord in the entire game. Scrag is incredibly mediocre because of the nerf to Gorgers. So the best lord for the Ogres is going to be a Slaughtermaster. Slaughtermasters have really good lores of magic. Beast is okay, but the lore of the Great Maw is actually very good. It has excellent anti-infantry tools with Bone Crusher and the Maw. It has a really good healing spell with Troll Guts. He has a passive healing effect on himself of 0.10. I mean, what's not to love? These guys are awesome, and I would say that Slaughtermasters are just super cost effective. If you're trying to win with Ogres, that's typically what you're going to be doing. Now for the Tomb Kings, this is a bit of a dual-pronged answer. So, assuming the Tomb Kings weren't a faction with a game-breaking bug, I would say that Ark in the Black is the best lord. You know, having the Tomb Blade of Arkin, the Staff of Nagash, Liber Mortis, Lord of Death are all very good, right? So without the bug being in place, Ark in the Black is hands down the best lord in my opinion. But with the current bug, and let me explain it to you. So basically the Tomb King's lore of Nehekara, it replenishes the ammunition of all your units. So if you're constantly spamming spells with Lore of Nehekara, you're going to be getting refunds on ammunition with your archers, with your catapults, your Shapti Grapos, your Bone Giants. It's just broken for sure. It's incredibly crazy. So like with the bug in place, and if it is being played with, then the Grand Hierophant Kotep is probably your best bet because he's really good with the Lich Staff, and Sandstorm is also very good. What his Lich Staff does is it increases the cooldown of enemy abilities every time you cast a spell. So yeah, probably Kotep would be the best with the current bug in place, but without it, it's going to be Ark in the Black. But that's going to get fixed, and then I think it'll go back to being mostly Ark in the Black. Granted, the Lore of Nehekara passive is very good. Every time you cast a spell, it heals your entire army for about 180 HP, give or take. So I think that's what it comes out to in like your Tomb Guard and things like that. So it's tough, but I still am a huge fan of Ark, and I think he's very good. And you could always go Ark in the Black and then bring like with just Spirit Leech for that summon and for his abilities, and then you could go with like a Lich Priest as well with just a couple Nehekara spells to heal your army. Tons of viable strategies for sure. So to finish off today's video with the Vampire Counts, I do think that the strongest lord for the counts is going to be Manfred von Karstein. And the reason why I pick him over the Blood Dragon Lord, which is obviously a very viable lord and depending on your strategy can be better than Manfred, is that Manfred contributes to infinite winds of magic. Now he has access to Lore of Death, which is very good depending on the matchup, obviously Lore of Vampires, and the Sword of Unholy Power is crazy good. Every 10 seconds Manfred's in combat, which is generally speaking, he's going to be in combat most of the time. He's giving you a full power reserve back and also recharging winds of magic. He has the Master of the Black Arts, and generally if you put Manfred with double Necromancers on the Forbidden Rods and you're just unsummoning them and using the rods, you're just getting so much winds of magic that you're just spamming winds of death all day. It is insanely gross and very, very strong. And of course, you know, the Warhammer fantasy villain here, he should be very strong, right? So Manfred von Karstein, I think, is the best lord. So once again, just want to thank you guys all for joining. Those are all the factions. I think, you know, it'd actually be really funny if we did miss one faction. It's just like not in here, and yeah, it'd be pretty hilarious, especially if it's like a bad faction. But anyways, I want to thank you guys for joining. Let me know if you guys disagree or you agree with these selections. I'd be curious to hear some feedback. There's a lot of factions in here I don't really specialize in. I'm kind of the Dark Lord of playing bad factions like Empire and Dwarves and Kisslive and stuff. So my knowledge of the sweatier factions is very anecdotal. But again, let me know if you guys agree or disagree. Really appreciate you all. We'll see you on the other side. Take care of yourselves, and may Sigmar bless you all.